Okay guys, so what I'm going to do today is talk about how to create a reusable switch component like this one up here, how to make it accessible, how to maintain state between page loads, browser, closing, opening, sessions, etc. And then we're going to look at how we use that for a theme switcher in this particular instance. So if we're looking at this demo here, the first thing we'll look at is it's actually a checkbox that renders to look like a switch. So we can just tap on that and keep switching backwards and forwards. If I click away from that and hit the tab key, I get to my logo, tab again, it gets to the switch. So it's focusable for accessibility. I can press my space bar to change that now. So it's completely accessible and reusable. Okay, once we've done that, we will then look at how to use that as a theme switcher. So here is the inspiration first. So Maria over here in the Digital Ambition Inner Circle asked the question about how to make this happen. Barry responded with a possibility, which was this page here. I'll link this in the tutorial. And this was used as the base for what I do. So it's not exactly the same. The structure, the DOM structure here that we created is exactly as that, with some different class names. We're using BEM class naming to make it reusable. And obviously then the CSS changes for that, but the basis of it is exactly the same. So that's where the inspiration comes from. So thanks to Barry for sending that across. And here we go. We're going to actually look at how we actually do this. Now, let's look at the switch first. I'll actually put this into my header. So I'm going to look at the header. So I'm going to edit the my standard header. There's my standard header here. There's my switch. And here's my DOM content that I've created here. Now, if we look back over at this article here, there's a structure there for the DOM. So we've got a div at the top. So let's have a look at that first. And the div's just got a class on it. So if we look at our version, we've got a div here. And I've got CSS on this, so I've just put in bracket CSS. And it is a div, and it's got a class on it, which I've called switch component. So that's going to be my base or my root for my BEM naming. And on there, we've got some CSS. And that's all we've done with that. And all the CSS for all of these elements is all in this one place to keep it nice and clean and easy to follow and easy to read. The rest, if we put CSS on each of these elements here, then we're going to go find it. Particularly when if you wanted to change the behavior at different breakpoints, it just makes sense to have it all in the one place. All right, so there's our first level. The second level is this label. You might be thinking, how do I add a label to the Bricks UI? It's actually pretty damned easy. So if I just hit over here, I'm going to replicate what I've done. If I grabbed a div and I put it there, and on that div, I select it and go to my content, change my tag to a label. Okay, so now that's going to put a label. Even though we added a div to the structure, because we've changed the tag, it's going to add a label instead. This is one of the favorite things about Bricks is that you can create anything you want. This is near DOM level, this structure here. There are some things that aren't, but generally what you do here is pretty much DOM level, which is brilliant. So the next thing on that label is that we've got a class, which is pretty obvious. We've got a BEM class for that. But we've also got a attribute for 4. Now they've just given their ID for their input checkbox. Which is not very reusable, so we're actually using a BEM name for that. So how do we add the 4 attribute to that label? So if I'm just going to delete the extra one there. So this is the label here. So here's the label. If we go to the Style tab, go to my attributes, we don't need the 4. Sorry, I forgot about that. We don't need the 4 because the label is actually wrapping the input. We actually don't need the label. We don't need the 4 attribute. So 4 looks at the ID, and because we want this to be reusable, we don't want to set an ID on this and then use that for the label. Otherwise, it's not going to be a reusable switch. So I forgot that when I started looking at it, so I decided not to use that for on there. But if you want to add the attribute, you just do it through there. Right, so what else do we have? So our next one is a div with just slider and round. So if we look at ours, I've got there's my input. Sorry, I missed the input, didn't I? I've got the input here, sorry. Got our input, and our type is checkbox. So if we go to the input there, I've given it a BEM name of switch component with the element input. If you're not familiar with BEM, just do a search on get BEM and have a look. It's just a naming convention. Okay, now again on the content tab, I've changed the custom tag to input. On the style tag in the attributes, I've set the type checkbox, which gives us type equals checkbox. Okay, and then I've added another one, which is they don't do in the example, which is ARIA label, which I've put a toggle dark theme. And you can change this on a per use basis. In this case, I'm going to use this to toggle a dark theme. So when a screen reader focuses on that switch, I want it to actually read that this is to toggle the dark theme. So it'll actually read that it's a checkbox and it's got a label saying toggle dark theme. Okay, right, so that's there. The next thing is just a basic div with two classes on it. Now they separated out the slider class and the round class. So the slider class gives us this background wrapper, and the round class gives us the rounding of the corners on both the outside and also on the switch on the inside. So in our example, we've got the slider there. So I've got my switch component with the slider element, and I've got my switch component with the slider element with a modifier, which is the two dashes round. That's how I'm targeting that. So that's the BEM naming that's different to the example. And then I've got a basic text element. Actually, let's head back over to the example. And the other thing we've got here is our EM for enable dark mode. That's just the markup they use, so I'm just following what they use. You can change that if you wish to. So I've got a basic text here, and in my content, I've done a custom HTML tag, and I've set that to EM and enable dark mode, and that's all I need to do. I don't need a class because we're going to target that as an EM. All right, so that's all there is to the DOM structure. Follow me so far? Brilliant. All right, so that is the basic structure for the switch. Now the CSS. The rest of this down here we'll talk about when we look at the functionality, but now for the CSS. So we come back to the theme switch base, got the switch component highlighted there, and we look at the CSS tab, and that's all of our CSS there. I'm going to actually copy that. I'm going to open this up in VS Code, just so we can see it a bit. It's a bit hard to demonstrate code in this little editor here. It's better if we just set it full screen here. Okay, so the first thing I've done here is unset the minimum width and minimum height on all elements under root. So that's the root is referring to switch component, and I want to unset the minimum width and height because in the bricks editor it sets it to a minimum of 70 pixels high and 70 pixels wide, which just breaks our design. So I'll show you what happens if I comment this out. This is just broken because that's a minimum of 70 pixels high by 70 pixels wide, and it just doesn't look right. In the front end it works fine, but in the back end and the editor it just doesn't look right. So I'm just unsetting those bricks editor settings so it looks like a switch. So that's what that's for. And again, root refers to switch component in this case. All right. We're then using locally scoped variables, which is a very good way of overriding and using these as a reusable component. Because if I then copy this to another, like if I went in here and I duplicated that, all I have to do is on that root, not on the component, just on the ID, just override these variables, and I've got a different switch, completely different switch, which we'll show you a bit shortly. So, oops. So we've got some basic stuff here. Got a focus color. Now I'm actually using ACSS, but what I noted was that the focus works on the links, buttons. That's a link there, which is the logo. but it didn't work on my checkboxes. There's no targeting of the checkbox when it's outside of form scope. So I had to add that in there. So I've just duplicated the ACSS so I've just set a focus color to be my action color from ACSS. That can be whatever you like. And then down here somewhere, where we go, I've got a focus rule. So when the switch has focus, then use the action color. And these are the same settings from ACSS. Again, you can override those to be whatever focus you want. Okay, so we've got a focus color, we've got a border radius. Radiuses are weird with border radius is a really, really odd thing with CSS. So if you've got a rectangle and you set a border radius of 50%, it's actually 50% of the height and then 50% of the width. So you end up with a ellipse shape, not a rounded cornered rectangle. It gives you a different border shape for the top and the side. But if you specify it in pixels and the pixels are way bigger than what you've got, it rounds it properly. So if I set that to 300 pixels, it would still look the same. But if I lower that down to say 5 pixels, then I'll see a 5 pixel border radius there. So just use a large radius if you want the whole thing rounded. Switch height, which is the height of the actual switch bit. So this round white thing in the middle. And then we've got some spacing, 4 pixels, which is the space between the switch and the edge of that track there. Okay, and then we've just got our colors. So when the switch is off, what's our track color? When the switch is on, off, what's our switch color? So that is off. We've got a light gray background and a mid-gray switch color. And then when it's on, we've got a green background with a white switch color. So that's that there. Okay, so that's our variables that we would override for changing the way it works on a per instance basis. And then we've got some calculations for our CSS based on these variables up here, which we'll use further down. I'm not going to go through all the CSS because if you're doing this, you should understand what flex is, you should understand what align items are, etc. Now, EMs, we're basically margin left, font size 1.2 rem. EM is just basically this label, enable dark mode label, whatever you want that to be. Okay, so that's just margin left to 10, font size 1.2 rem. Okay, now our switch component label. So actual switch component, I'll show you, should come back to that. The import, I forgot to mention on that one. In our dev here, it's a checkbox. Actually, I think I did mention it, sorry, I'm losing track. So in here, we've set our input to our tag to an input, our style, custom attributes. We set our type to checkbox. So it's actually a checkbox that's being rendered. And what we're using is the label on that checkbox as the background to put everything inside of that. So the label is positioned relatively and the switch is positioned absolutely inside of that. Okay, so here's our label. So it's an inline block, the height of our label height, position relative, width, margin, pretty obvious stuff there. Okay, then I already went through that focus. Now this is an interesting one. So what we're doing with our input is we're setting the opacity to 0. In the example that I looked at, they were setting the display to none. Now, as far as accessibility is concerned, it will not receive any focus events because as far as it's concerned, there is no input that's being displayed. But if you set the opacity to 0, it's still there, you just can't see it, so it still receives the focus, so we can then use the focus pseudos to put our, where are we? So that color around it, when it's focused, we can use the pseudos to do that. So I'm losing track a little bit here. Okay, now the slider. So where did we put that? Let's have a look in our structure. The slider is after the input. The slider, I think, is the actual background there. It's the off track. It's actually the track. So the slider is actually the color of the track. So the label is just an empty, absolutely positioned container. The slider is this background grey at the moment, which goes green. So we're just setting the background color to 0, inset 0, which is top, right, bottom, left 0, shorthand for that, cursor point, a position absolute, and a transition of 0.4 seconds. Pretty simple. And then on the before, we're going to add the actual switch. So this round switch that we've got there. So we're setting the bottom from our spacing. So that was the 4 pixels we set up at the top here, I think we did. So we've got a spacing from the bottom of 4. Empty content, so it displays the height of the switch, the width of the switch. That is all calculated. So all we do up here is put our switch height in there. It automatically calculates the width for us, so it's round. Could have used a aspect ratio, but this made more sense for me. Left, so how far from the left is it? So it's the spacing, which again is 4 pixels. Okay, so when it's off, it's 4 pixels from the left, 4 pixels from the bottom. And it's absolutely positioned and a transition of 0.4 seconds. All right. Then what we're doing is when the input is checked. So we've clicked this and the input is now checked. So even though we can't see an input because we've got its opacity set to 0, when the input is actually check status, what we're going to do is the switch component, which is straight after it, right, input checked, and then followed by, which is the plus, the slider. We want to change the color of that. So we're going to put the on track color on the slider. So that's the green. And then the switch, so the same rule up to this point, but then on the before, probably should be 2 colons for the before. Keep it semantically correct. Both will work at this stage, but just keep it semantically correct. So before, we're going to change the background color to the on switch color. So that gives us the white when it's on, grey when it's off. Okay. And then also what we're going to do is transform. Just looking here, if I doubled that up, I think I have. I went off the example and I didn't even look at that. I think this here would actually be on that rule there, and we can get rid of one of those rules. It's exactly the same, I think. Yes, it is. So what we're saying now is that when the switch input is checked, so the checkbox is checked, look for the slider before, which is the switch, round switch, set the background color, and then translate the X of the switch width, so the width of the switch across, plus the spacing again. So that could have been space times 2 if we wanted to. So actually, I'll just simplify that if I went times 2. Okay, and that will do exactly the same thing. So that's just basically when it's checked. So when it's not checked, the position of that is on the left. And when we check it, the position of that is the spacing across, so the size of the switch plus the spacing times 2. And that moves it across. Okay. And then we just got our border radius. So both the slider, if we've got the slider round modifier. So remember in the structure here, we put the, where are we? On the, where's our modifier? There we go, on the theme switch slider, we've got our switch modifier there. So what we're doing is saying that if it's got the round on it, then on the slider, set the border radius to the border radius. And if it's, and also on the before, set the border radius to whatever we set our border radius to. Now let's have a look at what that actually does here. I'll look at my switch there and go to the switch component. All of the variables I set are on that switch component. So let's say we only want a 10 pixel radius. That's changed up there. So both the track and the switch is a 10 pixel radius. You could separate these out to separate border radiuses if you want. I'm going to change the way that works. It's entirely up to you. Let's say we want a smaller switch. We're going to make that 15 high. Oops. I love the way Chrome does that sometimes. 15 high, so it's a smaller switch. Maybe we want less spacing, so it's a really tight switch. So let's make that, say, 2 pixel spacing. We don't want green when it's on. Let's have that as a bit of a bluish color, more color in there. All right, and now we've got a switch that's blue and grey when it's off, blue when it's on. Maybe in the off position, we want it to be different color. So this could be switching between a red theme and a blue theme. So in the off position, maybe the track color is a red. Okay, go off, we get a red for the track color. That's as simple as just changing these variables. Let's show you in actual reality. So if I get this whole thing here and duplicate it, okay, I'm not going to, I'll take out these extra, what I take out there. So I've just got a duplication there without the code. Now, if I wanted to change the way this worked, I can grab these variables from the CSS here. So let's say we just grab those. Get rid of the class, so we're just editing the ID, and do root, we'll paste it in there. Okay, now this switch is different to that switch now because I'm actually changing these variables at the ID level, not at the class level. Let's say we want that to be a border radius of 5, we want a height of 15, we want a off-track color of red, we want the switch color to be white, we want the on-track to be green, and the switch color on that to be black. Okay, so just overriding these basic variables here, and we've got a completely different switch. If I now have a look at my theme here, there's my original switch, here's my other switch that I've just duplicated and changed some variables. So we've just proven it's reusable, which is the target, so I'm just going to get rid of that now. All right, so we're going back to the switch now. So that is the reusable switch, and I will export this as a template and make it available to you guys so that you can have a starting point. But that is, to me, that's really cool. Now I can just copy and paste that, or I can save that switch as a template, get rid of this code out of it, because this is actually specifically for the seam switch. So we get rid of the code here, and from that point, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements here make up that reusable switch. And we can save that as a template, and then we can insert that anywhere we like, and we've got a switch ready to go. All right, so that's the switch: reusable, accessible, and customizable. Happy with that? Okay. So the next thing we do is we're going to actually now use that switch as a theme switcher. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is look at the CSS for the colors. Okay, so if I look at my, I've just put this in as a code here, a code widget here. You could put this wherever you put your global code, same as the JavaScript for this. I probably wouldn't put it here. I'll put it here just so I can demonstrate it easily, but I would take it out of here and stick it into a code manager. But this is so we can actually demonstrate it. So my global CSS for my theme color is basically on my root. I'm just creating 3 variables here, which is my BG1, color BG1, color heading 1, color body 1. And then I'm creating another set of rules where I've just got the attribute selector of data-theme equals dark, and then I'm overriding these colors here. All right, now what that does, refresh that, is when I switch the switch, it changes those colors. All right, how it does that, if we look at our body tag here, zoom in a little bit on that. So on our body tag, you can see we've got an attribute here that says theme dark. Right? And if I turn that off, the attribute theme dark disappeared. Turn it back on, and my attribute theme dark came back again. All right, so that is what's controlling whether this is actually applying and overriding those color variables. And that's all there is to the switching of it. Okay, it's pretty cool, isn't it? Now, what we're going to look at here is also the functionality here of this, where if I refresh this page, it's going to remember that that switch is on. So on my body, I've got data theme dark. Okay, if I turn that off, and then I refresh this page or close and open the browser, now my body doesn't have data theme dark. So I'm saving the state of this switch between sessions, and then on each page load, it checks that state and sets the state of the body, and it sets the state of that checkbox based on what was saved in the local storage. So that's what we're going to work on now. All right, so heading back to here. So that is all we need to do with those colors to define those colors. All right. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. In fact, what I might do is actually go to the actual test page so we can see this a little bit better. So look at the pages here. We've got a test page here. I'll edit that page. Okay, so we're editing on this page. We're going to see the same stuff here. And in here, what I'm doing is going to my theme settings. I created a theme called Test for Theme Switch. Create a new one, you hit the plus button, and then you just create a new one. Unfortunately, I would export this for you for the demo, but there used to be a way to export these themes. For whatever reason, in the current version of Bricks, you've got oh, here we go. It's under this pencil now. Okay, there we go. So it is there. So I will export this for you. Sorry. So in this, all I've done is in my conditions, I've set it to an individual page and set it to my test theme switch page, which is this page here. If you're going to use this for the entire site, then that would be the entire website. Okay, and that's so that this theme will apply to that, whatever you're using. That's all I've done here. Now, here's where the magic happens. In my colors, this is a bit of a hangover from Bricks, where generally these aren't used in Bricks designs anymore, but this is how you get to your colors. So you get to your colors, click on at least one of these swatches here to get to your color palettes. Now again, I've created a color palette here. I've called it Theme Switch. I've actually got Automatic CSS, which has got a bunch of palettes here. So I've created a new a new color palette called Theme Switch. Again, you set the plus, and then you can save that as whatever you want to call it. I've then added 3 colors to this. All right, and those 3 colors are my BG color, my headings, and my body. Now, if I come back to here, edit my heading again, back to this global CSS. So my background color here is my variable of color BG1. So all I want to do is map that to a color here. So this color BG1, if I edit that, I'm going to go to my raw, and I want to make sure they've got var. I already have that. You can't edit it once it's in there. So var color BG1, and that will map this swatch to that variable. Okay, now you can override them. So when you add your data theme dark to the body, that variable updates, which means that this is now a different color. Now there is a bug or a quirk in Bricks, which I'm going to show you here, which you got to work around. But once you've done that, you hit the save your changes. Okay, it tells me it already exists. Okay. Now, coming back to here, so I'll show you what the bug is. If I create a new one, I'm going to clear that. Okay. If I create a new color, if I call this var, actually, let's actually create a new color. I'm going to call this color test red. Actually, I'll give it a next color, so hash ff0000. My color test red is a hex of ff0000. Save that. I'm going to copy this name here, and let's go back to my theme. I'll just refresh this so I've got everything that I need. Take it back into my themes, colors, Let's say I'm going to create a new color. So I go to raw and I put var. This is the new color that I've just created, right? And then I hit save. That's not red, is it? It does not pick up that color. So what's going on here? So if I just get rid of that, maybe I'll hit the update, hit F5, go back to my theme, colors. So it's picking up my raw color, color 4, there we go, sorry I have to edit that. Let's just call this color red. And save. By the way, pressing the enter key doesn't save, you've got to tick the box here to save it. I've got this called color red. So it's referencing this variable test red, which it has available to it, but it's not actually showing that color here. And what I found is that, I don't know whether this is a new bug in Bricks or it's always been that way. What I found I had to do if I want to use it is I have to get the actual color. So I'll have to get this hex color here, and then I'll save that. Just edit that color again. So you go to the hex tab, put the color in there, okay, and so it looks red, and then go to the raw tab and put the color test red in there and save that. All right. Now if I set the background on this here to my background of, it doesn't even show up there, look at that. What's going on? Themes. It's a little bit glitchy, isn't it? But I mean, Bricks is brilliant, but this part of it is really not good. There we go, so it shows it as red there. Maybe I'll try the F5. Okay, so let's look at our theme. Page, oh, not page settings, theme, colors. Now it shows as red there. So what if I go into my style, background, still shows as, not showing the correct color, but if I put that there, it does show as red. So yeah, it needs some work here. So that works there. Now, here's where it's really cool though. So even though it doesn't show correctly in the palettes here, if I don't set the hex color, it doesn't even show it here correctly, right? But if I then go to my global CSS and I'll change that to FF, maybe we'll make it a dark red. So we'll make it, we'll make it a 440000. Change that there, right? Now I haven't changed it in my palette, but if I do an F5 here, it does update. So even though the Bricks UI doesn't see it, and if I go into here, my styles and background, it still shows it as being grey. If I go into my themes, colors, into there, it shows it as being red. Even in here, it shows it as being red. It's a little bit buggy, but it doesn't really matter because all we're doing is setting this up once, and then we're changing those values in CSS anyway. So it doesn't really matter. It's just a little bug that's a little bit frustrating at the moment with the Bricks, but mate, for everything that it does, I'm prepared to put up with a few little quirks for how amazing this product is. Anyway, so that is how you create your colors and then how you map them across to your theme colors here. And then all you have to do is apply those theme colors. So if I look at this background here, I've got my background set to my background color, okay, which actually maps through to, if I look at the raw, that maps through to color BG1, which is our color BG1 here, which then changes to this color here when we've got theme dark on the body. So that's the mapping of the CSS to theme colors, right? All right, so there's only one last step we need to look at here, which is the JavaScript that makes this button work. Now, at first, I was going to, on the, where are we, the input here? I was going to use the interaction. So I was going to go into interactions here and add an interaction on click, select, toggle attribute of data, oops, theme, dark, on body. All right, so that was the idea, is that we'd click the switch and then this interaction would toggle the data theme dark on the body. It works. The problem is that because of the way this works, it stops the propagation of the event on the checkbox. So the checkbox never changes state visually. You never see any change here. The only thing you see change is the actual theme, but this breaks it. Now, I'm not sure whether these are whether they've got a prevent default or it's returning a true to say that it's already being dealt with. I'm not sure what this is doing or why it's doing that, but you can't use this if you want the checkbox to work. So let's get rid of that. We've got no interactions that we can use, so we have to do this with JavaScript. All right, so all I've done is added a code widget and added some script in here and hit the execute code and render without wrapper. Now, quick little tip with this. I'm just going to show you where that is in Brex. Settings, builder access. So in builder access, you've got code execution here, and you have to enable it for at least the administrator. Otherwise, you cannot execute code. You just don't get these switches here. My feeling is that you should only ever enable this for the administrator, never for anyone else. And the reason for that is that if you enable this, anybody on a blog post that they can use Bricks for, or a page that they can edit, they can use Bricks for, they can copy and paste some code from somewhere, hit the execute code, and they can majorly impact the security of your website. So I would say, in my estimation, only administrators should be given access to this, and then you need to be careful about who you give administrative rights to. That's just a sideline. Okay, the JavaScript. Again, I'm going to put this up in VS Code because it's just too hard to read in there. So here it is in JavaScript. And always with JavaScript, always put it in an enclosure. So I've got this enclosure here with the ES6 function. So that's the beginning of the enclosure. That's the end of the closure. And always say this, but always do that, because what that does gives you an independent scope inside here. So you can use very weak class names, body names, function names, and they're not going to clash with any other code on your website, because this is its own context inside here. You can imagine if you had a constant body here, you had some other script that's got a constant body, your JavaScript's going to fail. But if it's got its own context, that doesn't matter what you call this in this context. Okay. So in the JavaScript, all we're doing is we're getting a storage var name. We're just setting that so that when we save our variable in storage, so that we've got the state between sessions, it's just got a common name. Just getting a reference to the document body. And then we're getting a reference to the theme switch by using document query selector, theme switch ID, and then the theme switch component input. So let's have a look where that is. So here's my theme switch, and on that theme switch, because I'm using this for the theme, so this is my reusable component, but in this instance, I want to use that as in JavaScript, so I've given that CSS ID of theme switch. All right, and then inside that's where the theme switch, and then we've got our standard BEM named theme switch input. So our theme switch ID, and then our theme switch input component there. Okay, so that's the element we're going to target, this input right here. And we're going to add an event listener to it of click, ES6 function, where we pass in the event as E. We get the current target from E, so that is the checkbox that actually triggered the event. And then we're going to toggle dark mode, it's another function down here, based on whether that checkbox is checked or not. So that's a true or a false. Okay. Then we get an ES6 function called toggle dark mode. We get a true or false passed in here. If it's true, set dark mode. Otherwise, clear the dark mode. Pretty straightforward. Okay, set dark mode. Now, this is an extra line that needs a bit of explanation. So because we're going to use the variable in the local storage to restore the last setting, if this here was checked, all right, by default it's not checked, so it goes to the local storage, it finds the variable, and then it's got to check that switch. Okay, so it stays in the correct state. So what we're going to do is tell it that when we're setting dark mode, make sure our checkbox is in the true position. If it's already in the true position, then it's not going to make any difference. Okay. Then we're going to set our body attribute. So on the body that we've got a reference to up here, we're going to set the attribute of data theme to dark. And on our local storage, we're going to set an item for our storage variable name, which is dark mode. We're going to set that to just a string that says true. Okay, could be anything, could be one, could be, doesn't matter what that is. As long as it exists, we're actually going to accept that. And then on our clear dark mode, so if the switch is not checked or what we pulled back from the local storage is false, we're going to clear the dark mode. All we're going to do is remove that data theme attribute from the body. And then our local storage, we're going to remove the item from the local storage. Okay, and then on a page load, all we're doing is saying the same thing as the checkbox listener here for the click listener, but we're pulling the local storage, get item, storage var that we stored up here, toggle our dark mode, so that goes okay. If it was true, what was stored in the local storage, set the dark mode. If it's false, clear the dark mode. All right. And that gives us the functionality we want. So if I'm clicking this here, you can see I've got no, on my body here, I've got no dark mode. Turn it on, I've got data theme dark. And then my CSS, I can actually see it on the right-hand panel here. I'll turn that off. The colors applied are not my data theme dark. Turn it on, and the colors applied are my data theme dark. All right. So that was an awful lot to go through. Hopefully it makes sense. If it doesn't, or you've got any questions, just reach out. A lot to cover in this. I think there's a lot of really good learning experiences in this. Seeing the power of bricks, how easy it is to toggle things, how easy it is to override variables to have for reusable components. So that's it. Yeah. So hope you enjoyed that. If you did, hit the subscribe, hit the like. Thank you.